Hello everyone, it is Lucy here. I am joined by Cam.
Hi Lucy.
Now Cam, we are on our third Hearthstone beginner's guide, essentially, which is what this is.
Third video of several hundred, if my experience learning Hearthstone is anything to go by.
Yep, fantastic. Alright, so basically what we've done already is we've kind of gone through the essential things you need to know about the game. So like the bare bones.
Very core mechanics.
Yep.
There's a lot of stuff we haven't covered, obviously, and we've dipped into the Mage and played a couple of games. And yeah.
Yep. And now what we're going to do today is you are going to show me, you're basically going to give me a class overview.
Yeah, we'll just quickly run through the classes. It's a bit tricky. Like what I've actually done since our last video is I've gone through and leveled up a bunch of the classes to level 10 and built some custom decks with them.
So what does it mean? Like the one thing that I'm still not quite sure of is like, so you level up your cards, you level up your heroes.
The purpose of leveling up your class, initially, see how it says Hunter 10 of 20 basic cards?
Right.
That's because we haven't played the Hunter yet. So once you get to level 10, you've got the 20 basic cards.
Okay.
And then from that point on, you unlock like gold cards and stuff like that. But that's kind of the levels. Once you're into the game, the levels are kind of more just about prestige than much else, and to give you an idea of which classes you've played the most of. But yeah, what I wanted to do before we started this video was just kind of have all the basic cards for a few of the classes, so that if we choose to play with them, we've at least got a few more cards. But yeah, it's like the basic cards are pretty rubbish, honestly.
Right.
And none of the classes, we're not in a position, because we've got so few cards in total, we're not really in a position to get that much of a taste of the true flavor of each class.
Okay.
Because we're so restricted in our options and the kind of iconic abilities and moves of each class. We don't really have that much access to them, but that doesn't mean we can't kind of do a bit of an overview and just have a chat about it. So we'll start with Druid, and this is like this will give you an indication of kind of where we are in terms of the card collection. So these are the cards for Druid that we own right now, and then if you hit crafting mode, these are all cards that we don't have.
Right. Okay, I didn't even know that there was a crafting mode in Hearthstone.
Well, so you basically if you have, say, 3 copies of a card, you can only ever play 2 in a deck. So you can dust that extra card, and then use the dust to craft other cards. So it's not all just whatever you open in card packs. You can also choose to create cards, but it costs a lot of dust to do that, relative to the number of cards you have to destroy to create that card. Okay,
so is crafting, I mean, I don't want to get too far off like our focus, but like is crafting something that you do regularly, or do you just kind of rely on...
Yeah, totally. And that's kind of one of the things is when you've been playing for a while, you'll be like, okay, I've got enough I've got enough dust to craft a handful of cards, or maybe one legendary card, and then you kind of work out, okay, well, how do I want to play the game? What deck do I most want to be able to run? What cards am I missing? I mean, it's pretty complicated. Like you're kind of best off almost just mucking around with each class, finding one that you like, and then trying to kind of build a collection for that class. But I just hop between them all, so it's taken me quite a long time to build up all my cards. But yeah, I've crafted heaps of cards. I've also, just being totally honest, spent a lot of money on card packs too.
Yep.
And that's purely because I don't have a huge amount of free time to kind of grind it out. And so I just want to get to kind of a higher level of collection faster. But, you still obviously need skill to win your games.
Yeah. Yep.
So
we're looking at the Druid right now. Now, like, for example, I wouldn't know. Maybe it's because I'm not enough of a sort of like fantasy enthusiast.
Yep.
But I'm curious, like, what is the difference between a Druid and a Mage? Is that a stupid question, or
a Druid kind of draws its power from nature.
Right.
So Druids have like a lot of cards that are to do with like summoning trees to attack and healing and that kind of idea. So it's about like the cyclical nature of nature, whereas a Mage is much more of just a straight spellcaster, damage dealer, freeze, fire, that kind of stuff.
And what's the Druid's special kind of
So the Druid's
power?
hero power is you gain 1 attack for the Druid and you gain 1 armor.
Right.
So it kind of bolsters. If you're at 30 health and then you use the Druid's hero power, you are effectively at 31 health because you've got 30 health plus 1 armor, and so your opponent has to chip through the armor before they start doing damage to you as a whole. So it's pretty good hero power. I mean, all the classes that have kind of the ability to instantly attack. So Mage shoots the fireball, whatever it's called.
Yep.
Does 1 damage. Rogue also has a dagger that she can summon. So they're quite effective because it's like an instant 1 extra damage that you kind of have at your disposal if you need it. And Druid also does some nifty stuff, like he's got this card Innovate, which costs 0 mana, and it gives you 2 extra mana crystals. So it means that on turn 2, you can cast that, and then you can play a 4 mana creature.
Yeah.
So it's basically like one of the common kind of Druid builds is to ramp up really quickly. And so you use cards like Wild Growth, which accelerate your mana, the amount of mana crystals you have, to play with, and Innovate to kind of get bigger creatures out faster. And you basically just try and you put stuff on the board that your opponent can't deal with as quickly as possible. And with Druids, I mean, the classic kind of finisher for Druids is Force of Nature, summon 3 2/2 Treants with charge, but they die at the end of the turn. Mm-hmm. So they're really just like a one-use kind of thing. Then you play that alongside Savage Roar, which is... okay, it's not there. I guess that's because it's a card that has to be unlocked.
Right.
But that basically just boosts 2 attack to each of those Treants and to your hero. And so you can do 14 damage just from an empty board with that. So basically if you're playing against a Druid and they've got 9 mana to play with, then you have to be very wary of that, because as soon as you drop below 14 health, they can one-shot you if they've got those cards in their hand. Okay,
awesome. All right, that's a good overview.
And yeah, Druid kind of, Blizzard have introduced some kind of interesting new mechanics with Druid, where there's a new legendary that has a very cool ability. It shuffles back into your deck when it's killed. So essentially, you drop it on the board. It's a really threatening presence. They kill it, and then it goes back in your deck at a random position, and you theoretically draw it again at a later point in the game.
So you can, he gets one kind of
So he can be reincarnated over and over again. So
really?
So if a game goes really long and you're running out of cards, you kind of know that is always going to wind up in your deck.
Okay, cool.
I mean, it can be silenced and then killed.
Yep.
And silencing is another thing that we should kind of talk about sometime soon. And then there's other weird cards like Tree of Life, which restores all characters to full health. So both heroes, any minions on the board. So you could be like at 1 health, and your opponent could be at 30, and you could play that and just boost yourself all the way back up.
And just totally change the game.
So
the Druid's kind of a force to be reckoned with.
Druid
is
a class that doesn't have that many bad matchups.
Yeah.
I'm not particularly good with Druid, but it's one of those classes that performs pretty well against most other classes, whereas generally speaking, every class has a couple of kind of hard counters to it, but Druid's a pretty good all-round performer. Alright, so next up is the Hunter. And Hunter is all about beasts and synergy with beasts. And it's been a really dominant class for stretches of time, but then Blizzard have kind of come in and changed cards to kind of make them a little less dominant.
Right.
Just because, Hunter for a while there was just...
overpowered.
Really overpowered. It's debatable, but it was certainly a dominant force. Mm-hmm. And they've got some really cool stuff, like they've got secrets. So, I mean, we probably need to get into games to see these kind of things in action. But essentially, let's say you play a freezing trap. It basically means when an enemy minion attacks, it just gets sent back to your opponent's hand, and then it costs more for them to play it again.
Yep.
And there's stuff like an explosive trap, which does 2 damage to enemy minions and the enemy hero. But yeah, there's it's got Hunter's got weapons, and then the Hunter's ability is, for 2 mana, it does 2 damage to the enemy hero. So essentially, Hunter's like a ticking clock if you're playing against one, because they're quite aggressive. They can get minions out quickly. They can buff them up. They've got some really great tools to get through your stuff on the board. Like they've got a card called Hunter's Mark that drops the health of any minion to 1, and then you can just play a beast with charge or unleash the hounds, and just one-shot that, and on you go. But it's a ticking clock in the sense that you know that once they have a bit of mana to play with, they can use their hero power every turn and take you down by 2 health every single turn. So Hunter is actually a really fun class to play as, though. Next up, Mage. Well, we know a fair bit about the Mage.
Yep.
Common mages that are played these days are Mech Mage, with all the new Goblins versus Gnomes cards that came out recently.
Okay.
And that's a very aggressive, very fast-paced mage that relies on a card called Mech Warper that basically reduces the cost of playing mechs. Mm-hmm. So you get that on the board, and then you can just flood the board because it costs so much less to... It's kind of trying to ramp up as well, similar to... Well, not that similar to it, but you're trying to overwhelm your opponent. And then there's, builds like Freeze Mage, which is just about locking your opponent down and getting to your particular end game, which basically involves playing a particular card that drops them to 15 health, and then you just kill them with spells. So
when you say builds, do you sort of mean... like sort of cards that work in synergy with each other?
Yeah, that's right.
And like focused towards a specific kind of tactic.
Yep. So, so if you look at one of our deck lists, we've got 30 cards here. Because we've got so few cards, we don't really have a particularly cohesive strategy other than kind of, trying to play to the strengths of the class a little bit if we can. But once you've got a lot of cards to choose from, there are lots of different ways you can put those 30 cards together and lots of different strategies you can have. And one of the kind of key skills when you get a bit further into the game is identifying what cards you think your opponent's running. Because you can get a sense very quickly when you face off against somebody based on their first couple of turns what type of mage they are, or what type of warrior they are, or whatever the class may be. And then you start evaluating your choices based on, okay, well, typically they're going to be hoping to do this. They might be able to get rid of this minion with these spells. And then you're also kind of counting, okay, they've used 2 executes if it's a warrior, for instance. You go, okay, so they've got no more. What else do they have that could deal with this threat that I'm going to put down? So a lot of the time you're actually kind of trying to bluff on, well, you're trying to get your opponent to use their cards inefficiently.
Yep.
So you're kind of setting them up and tempting them to use removal so that you can then play the thing that you really want to play and have survive. So it's a very strategic thing. Paladin, its hero power is summon a 1/1 silver recruit, which is just like a soldier. And Paladins weren't in favor for quite a long time. They were considered pretty weak, but now they're back with a vengeance. And that's because of a couple of new cards that have been introduced that really let them kind of flood the board and buff their minions up. So Paladins have got they've got secrets too.
What's the Paladin's kind of theme?
Paladin's theme is stuff like Divine Shield, which is a shield around a minion that you have to do damage to before you can attack the minion.
Yep.
And a lot of healing, and let's have a look here. I mean, their secrets are all like, when one of your minions dies, return it to life with 1 health. They've got some really powerful removal, so they've got spells like Equality, which is change the health of all minions to 1. So you can play that, and then it's weird that you can't see the whole card collection because there are some cards you can't craft.
Yeah.
But then they have like the area of effect attack that can just wipe your board entirely. So again, you got to kind of play around that as much as you possibly can.
So has you sort of mentioned that Hearthstone with various sort of tweaks and new packs and stuff like that. It's kind of a changed game since it was when it was sort of launched. I mean, would you argue now that it's like much more sort of fair across the board in terms of what class you choose and that sort of thing?
I think the classes are more people are playing each class more, but the popularity of classes just kind of ebbs and flows naturally. But it is cool that something like Paladin started
off kind of weak and is back.
But I got to say, I think it's kind of probably pretty intimidating for newcomers to come in and know that okay, there's all the cards that people were playing with for 6 months, and then there's the Naxxramas expansion, which added another 30 cards.
Yep.
And then there's Goblins vs. Gnome, which added, like, you know, another 120 cards or whatever it is. And, you know, when you're buying card packs, you have to choose between classic card packs and Goblins vs. Gnome card packs, and it's a really kind of long road. And then, you know, you have to kind of pay for Naxxramas or buy it with gold and play through all these single-player challenges that then give you 30 cards. I mean, that's actually probably the best place to start, because you buy that and you play through it, and you're guaranteed to get this set of 30 cards, including a few legendaries.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a long road. Especially just playing Hearthstone now. You know, there's just so many of the Goblins vs. Gnome cards, you know, being used, obviously, because it's changed the game significantly. So it's kind of weird, like, being in this position, just playing with the really basic cards, and it's been kind of fun actually just going back to basics and just seeing, okay, this is what Hearthstone was like when I first started.
Yeah.
It's completely different to the game I play now.
And what I like, you mentioned this in the last video, but what I really like, you know, about this game is that you said, you know, it is about winning, but it's also about exploring the depth of the game. So, for example, you sort of reached a point where you were just winning game after game after game, and that's not necessarily, you know, that gets kind of tiring after a while. So you're kind of inspired to explore what else you can do.
Yeah. Like if I'm winning too much with a build, I generally try something else.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like,
I mean, I love that. I love that the game sort of, you know, inspires that.
Yeah, and I mean, for instance, if I wanted to climb the ladder and increase my ranking, I'd play Warlock, and I'd play what they call Zoo. And that's basically flooding the board, buffing minions up, and just taking your opponent down as quickly as you can. And it's a pretty effective deck, but it's not that fun to play against. And it's not that... I don't really find it that fun to play either. So I don't play that because I just don't really like it very much. I much prefer more control-oriented decks, where you're really thinking through... I mean, you have to think through permutations no matter what you're playing. But yeah, I mean, I don't mind kind of faster paced decks, but I generally prefer to kind of sit back and mull over my options and find creative plays, and Priest is like the ultimate example of that. Priest is just the most fun class because it's all about kind of synergies between cards and you know, using your Northshire Cleric to draw you a whole bunch of cards, and and Priest is just countless ways different players would play out the same game, drawing the same kind of cards in the same order.
Right.
Just because there's so many permutations of it. So yeah, I really, really love Priest. So Priest's ability is just to heal for 2. And yeah, he's got really powerful kind of removal, and then yeah, just synergies with other cards. So yeah, Priest is really good fun. I mean, there's stuff like Circle of Healing, which costs 0 mana, and it restores 4 health to all minions.
Yep.
And that's including enemy minions. So when you factor that in with cards like Northshire Cleric, and, oh man, cards like, where are we? Orkanai Soul Priest. So instead of your hero power healing for 2, it deals 2 damage. So you can play that card, and then you play Circle of Healing, and instead of healing for 4, it just does 4 damage to everything on the board. So it's like this instant board wipe.
Yeah.
But like Circle of Healing, you can use it with other cards like Injured Blade Master to restore their health, and it's there's just so many different ways to play the class. And Priest is another one that wasn't in favor for a long time, but now is really, really viable, and there's a bunch of different ways to play it, and I really like it.
Awesome.
So yeah, Priest is fun. Rogue went through a period a little bit like Hunter of just being completely dominant at top levels of play, and that was because of a style of deck which was called Miracle Rogue.
Yep. And
it basically had an end game of drawing a particular card that had called Leroy Jenkins, that has high attack and charge, so you can attack instantly, and then you use a card called Shadow Step, which costs 0 mana to return it to your hand, and then you just play it again, and so you basically Shadow Step it twice, and suddenly you just decimate your opponent. But the way it worked was you have all these really low cost spell cards in your hand, because you're ultimately trying to get to this one card that's going to win you the game somewhere in your deck. And so there's a card, this card,
Yep.
Gadget Zan Auctioneer, whenever you cast a spell, draw a card.
Right.
So basically, you're trying to get this card and then play a whole bunch of really low-cost spells to just draw your entire deck into your hand and have all the tools you need. But so it was a very, very high difficulty style of Rogue to play. But since they've made a couple of changes, Gadget Zone costs more, Leroy costs more. So Miracle Road's fallen out of favor a little bit. But like there's a lot of other viable rogues right now that do stuff like buff up your weapon. So the rogue's hero power is to draw a 1 damage dagger that has 2 charges. So you can use it on one turn, and then you've still got to charge the following turn. But it has cards like Deadly Poison that give it extra attack. You know, there's cards like Assassin's Blade that has 3 attack and lasts for 4 turns. Then you can use Deadly Poison on that. And, you know, the new cards have kind of added a bunch more kind of weapon options for Rogue that are really, really powerful for them. And Rogue is a class that is all about combos. And what a combo is it's an effect that you get only if you've played a card previous to that. So it's like you have to combo into playing that card.
Right.
So, for instance, if you look at Eviscerate, if you just played that first, it deals 2 damage. But if you combo it, so you've played a card before that, it deals 4 damage. Mm-hmm. And so Rogue has a whole bunch of really powerful cards like that, like SI7 Agent, where if you combo it, it just does. You can choose to do 2 damage to something on the board. So Rogue is a tricky class to play, but it's another really fun one, especially when you get it right, because it's got so many kind of spells, and there's so many different ways you could choose to use them.
Yeah, I mean, like, just from your sort of description of Rogue right then, it sort of strikes me as being a class that I wouldn't tackle straight away as a beginner. I would probably wait until...
Interestingly enough, I reckon Rogue is a good beginner class, because you don't have a lot of those cards in your deck. Wouldn't be geared around that. It would be more of a minion deck. So I think Rogue's actually quite accessible. But then as you get better, you kind of enter into a phase where Rogue is going to be much harder to play.
Right.
But I think it's actually a pretty good introductory class, to be honest. Shaman is a heap of fun. Shaman's hero power is to summon a totem, and it's one of 4, it's randomized, and it can be one of 4 totems.
Yep.
So a 0/2 that has taunt, a 0/2 that heals your minions for 1 at the end of each turn, a 1/1 or a 0/2 that gives you extra spell damage, which means your spells, do an extra point of damage. So Shaman's got weapons, really great removal, ways to buff up minions or your weapons, ways to Wind Fury means that you can attack twice.
Yep.
Mages are a really, really fun class to play as. And one of the mages' kind of core mechanics is...
Wait, do you mean Shaman?
Sorry, Shaman, yes.
Yeah.
One of the Shaman's core mechanics is Overload.
Yep.
And what that means is you basically... so this costs 1 mana to play, but it actually costs 3. It's just that the extra 2 you lose off your next turn.
Oh, okay.
Right?
God.
So you're kind of paying... Like, you're getting the advantage now, but you have to pay for it on the following turn. And so a big part of the skill with Shaman is knowing how to calculate for the overload on the next turn, and having enough, kind of factoring that in.
I have to admit, like, we're obviously going into this quite dry. We're not, like, this isn't me kind of learning about it organically.
Yep.
And I got to say, it sounds amazing, but I can see how it could be quite daunting. Like, there are some really sort of tricky plays that you're describing right now. And yeah, I'm very pleased that for a beginner, I mean, you can really start with a kind of basic,
totally
minion versus minion.
That is what I love about Hearthstone.
Kind of tactic.
It's like an onion.
Yeah.
It's just layers upon layers upon layers, and it gets sweeter the further in you get. So unlike an onion. For instance, on turn 3, you can play Feral Spirit, which summons 2/3 Spirit Wolves with Taunt. So basically, that sets up a wall for your opponent to get through, but you overload by 2. So if you play it on turn 3, on turn 4, you're going to have 2 mana, which is not really enough to do all that much. So you've really got to think about how effective that's going to be, and whether, because if your opponent has an easy way to deal with them, then you're just shooting yourself in the foot. Anyway, so Shaman is quite fun to play as well. Let's see, next up, Warlock.
Now, I imagine this is a popular class just by virtue of its name, because it sounds badass.
Yeah, Warlock is pretty badass. It's kind of the bane of everybody's existence in some way because of the zoo style of play that I mentioned before. But Warlock kind of used to be either really like fast and aggressive, or much more a bit slower and kind of reliant on dropping enormous creatures. So I'll show you. Oops. So the other way. Okay. The other way to play Warlock is with stuff like Giants, right? So it costs 1 less for each card in your hand. So basically you hope to have that in your opening hand, and then you just play as few cards as possible until that costs like 4 mana, and you drop it on turn 4, and then they have to deal with an 8/8. And there's stuff like Molten Giants, which are awesome. And a Molten Giant costs 1 less for each damage a hero has taken. So it starts at 20 mana, but by the time you get to turn, when you're down to 10 health, it costs 0 to play.
Yeah.
And then you can drop it out and use other minions to taunt it, so it's a wall for your opponent to get through. So if you're playing against a Warlock that's playing this style, you are very, very conscious of their health total, because if you know if they drop below a certain point, they're going to start dropping Molten Giants on you. And so you basically are looking to get them as low as you can so they can't play Molten Giants, and then burst them and kill them before they can play the Molten Giants.
Before they can play that card.
So if you watch pros, like they could be playing against a handlock player whose health is in the 20s, and they will choose not to attack when they can attack because they are just worried about Molten Giants, and they're just thinking longer term about, I'm not going to give him the opportunity to play them, and I'm just going to kill him from a high health total and just drop him.
Got it.
But then Warlocks also have demons, so minions can be part of a group, right?
Yep.
So Goblins vs. Gnomes introduced mechs as a group, and then we were talking before about hunters and beasts. So beast is a type of minion, and demons are a type of minion as well. And so you build decks around, say, mechs and cards that interact with mechs.
Yep.
Or you build decks around demons and cards that interact with demons. So Warlock's got some really strong cards like that just put your demons onto the field of play instantly, and that kind of idea. So there's kind of in between the two styles I was talking about, there's like demon kind of focused decks. So Warlock is a really complicated class. That handlock style of play is heaps of fun, but you've really gotta be a good player to play it effectively, because there's a lot of decision making, and the things you do in the early turns are going to have massive ramifications down the line to your ability to kill your opponent or your ability to defend what they're doing. So next up, last class,
Warrior,
is the Warrior.
the sort of the bread and butter class. I would imagine.
You would assume that it would be like the barbarian. I'm going to hit you in the face.
Yeah.
And he kind of is. He's got like
physical attacks.
Axes. He's got minions with charge. He's got other minions that can give minions charge. And he's got cards like Execute, which destroy a damaged enemy minion. So for instance, if you used Whirlwind if you're facing one of those Molten Giants, you could play Whirlwind, do 1 damage to it, and then execute it, with this single card, right? So Warrior's got really good kind of single target removal, but is pretty poor when somebody's trying to swarm the board. And that's why cards like Brawl, destroy all minions except 1, chosen randomly. Like that's kind of your get out of jail free card if you're facing a full board of enemy minions.
Yep.
But he doesn't have much AoE, which is area of effect attacks or spells. But generally speaking, Warrior, there are builds that are hyper aggressive and kind of geared around weapons, but generally speaking, Control Warrior is the dominant form of Warrior, which is a slower paced thing. Warrior's hero power is to gain 2 armor, so you can, especially if it's a slower kind of start, you can just be building armor. And then there's like Shield Block, which gains you 5 armor and draws a card. And then there are spells like Shield Slam, which you deal the amount of damage. The amount of armor you have is how much damage you deal. So kind of early on, you're just building armor, and you can use stuff like Shield Slam to just one-shot anything big that they play because you've got the armor to do it. And then you're kind of reliant on getting to the late game and dropping big minions. And any deck in Hearthstone, well, as you get further into Hearthstone, you start to realize that you have decks that are more specialized have particular win conditions that you're trying to work towards, and you're keeping an eye on. And sometimes when you realize your win condition is in sight, you can kind of take a risk and stop trading with their minions, because you know that if you just do a little bit more damage to their face, you're going to be able to use that win condition. So Warrior has stuff like a card called Alexstrasza, which is the one I mentioned before, that drops your opponent to 15 health, and then a legendary card called Gromash, who, when he's enraged, has +6 attack.
Yeah.
So bumps him up to 10. But if you enrage him, and what enraged means is he's taken some damage. But if you enrage him with Cruel Taskmaster and give him a bonus 2 attack, that's like 10 damage instant out of your hand on turn 10. So if you're playing against the Warrior, you know that's what they're going to try and do later in the game. So they're the classes. And then you've got all the neutral cards.
Right.
So there are class cards, and then there are neutral cards, and you can obviously have a mix of both in any deck. And I mean, there is
neutral can just be used by any class.
Yep. There's a huge amount of neutral cards, and these are like where a lot of the kind of crazy ideas and synergies and stuff come from is exploring the neutral cards.
Now, like, before we wrap up, I just want, like, I know this is a difficult question because obviously there are pros and cons to every class, but for a total newbie, for a total beginner, what class would you recommend as an easing your toe into the pool of Hearthstone?
Well, Mage is obviously the ideal one to start with. It's the one that you kind of go through the tutorial with.
Yep.
Mage is straightforward. I do think Rogue is pretty straightforward to begin with as well. Like, honestly, you'll get your head... And Hunter, I don't know, you'll get your head around whichever one you choose relatively quickly. And the harder classes to play, you know, you're still using a lot of the same minions early on. Like, I was finding, Shaman at the lower levels is good because your hero power means that you're getting something on the board every single turn, and then you can kind of buff them up and stuff. So, I don't know. Like, I think in the next video, I'll let you choose a class that we can experiment with, and we'll have a game or two and see how we go.
Sounds good.
Awesome.
See you then.
Cheers, Luce.